Vertical Clitoral Hood Piercings. Pros, cons, advantages, disadvantages. It's going to be actually 6 of each. Bonus. Also, we're going to talk about what you should know beforehand, getting the piercing, healing, jewelry, living with the piercing, and what happens if you decide, hey, I'm done with this, and take it out. Coming up next on Pros and Cons by a Piercer, Season 2, Episode number 27. So you probably want to stick around. For those that are new to the channel, first off, welcome to the channel. Hope you're enjoying the videos. Hope you're finding them edifying and useful. But you may not quite know who I am, even though I tend to say it over and over again. My name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and I operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio, located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. So, when I talk to you about these things, I'm talking to you a level of expertise that comes from being in the body piercing industry for well over 27 years. Before we get too far into this, I want to kind of give you a disclaimer. First off and foremost, I'm going to be talking about female genital piercing, or at least one. If you're easily offended, don't want to know anything more about that, or not of an appropriate age, this isn't the video for you. There are plenty of videos on our channel that have nothing to do with genital piercings or etc. I would suggest that you watch one of those. If you think you're going to get some type of tingly satisfaction of sexual gratification from this video, you're going to be disappointed. This video is solely for educational purposes. This is for those that are considering getting this piercing, or possibly the partner, or somebody that's just curious about it and open-minded. But beyond that, you're not going to get anything special. I know watching me might be. I don't know. So what are we going to talk about today is a vertical clitoral hood piercing. For those that don't know what this piercing is it's done through basically it's where the labia minoras connect at the top of the female genitalia, and there's a little bit of a additional flap of tissue that kind of hangs over the top of the clitoris to protect it. Basically, it's pierced through that vertically, usually done with a curved barbell. This is often mistakenly called a clit piercing or a clitoral piercing. It is not. We do not pierce the clitoris itself or go anywhere near it. The only thing that goes near the clitoris is the jewelry itself and the needle receiving tube when we do it. But the actual piercing has nothing to do other than being in the area, hanging out. It's a neighbor. It has nothing to do with actually piercing the clitoris. This is a piercing that is extremely anatomy specific. It needs to be done through that tissue. There needs to be enough of that tissue to actually cover the piercing and anchor it correctly so that it sits correctly and doesn't reject, tear, or migrate. Also, this piercing is a little bit more forgiving when it comes to the different types of female anatomy. Females, if you watch any of my other videos, I've explained over and over again, you all are very diverse in anatomy compared to male genitalia. It's almost like ears. There's just a vast amount of different shapes, sizes, and etc. You can kind of break it into two major types. There is the hill, which more of the genitalia is more out of the body, and then there's the valley, where most of it is hidden or inside. Everyone seems to be kind of in between the two of those. This piercing will work on both styles, hills and valleys. Unlike other piercings where, like a horizontal clitoral hood piercing, where if you were a valley and it was deep in there, it's not going to work well because it's going to twist back and forth and not be very comfortable. History. There's a lot of history throughout of ancient cultures piercing genital piercings, but for some reason, it's mostly men. I don't know why, but at least what's documented. There's very little documentation of female genital piercings predating the 20th century. Sorry, that's just the way it is. Now, how much of this could be basically that it wasn't done, and how much of this could be it wasn't polite to talk about, and it wasn't something they felt was important to document. You be the judge. The modern version of this and what we commonly do now, especially with the vertical, because the horizontal was a lot more popular initially and was more consistent. The vertical came a little bit later, at least in my memory. More than likely because I can't really find any documentation to point any direction other than this is it's a piercing that came about mainly in the punk and BDSM gay subculture of the 1970s, early 80s, was probably developed by Gauntlet and the many famous people that were there like Jim Ward and Angel and etc. After that, it kind of, I think the first time anybody had like knew about them outside of maybe that really tight-knit piercing community would have been those that were exposed to it in Pulp Fiction in 1994. Since then, it has slowly gained in popularity. Nowadays, I'd say probably after the turn of the century, right into the 21st century, that first decade or so, it became increasingly more mainstream. More celebrities came out and claimed the benefits of this particular piercing, and it became a lot more popular. I would say at this point in time, it is the most commonly done female genital piercing there is. It is like the Prince Albert. It's just the most common. Well, with all that out of the way, let's talk about the pros, the advantages, the things that make us go, yes, this is a piercing that's for me, one that's going to do me well. Number one, enhances sexual pleasure. Whenever I say things like this, I really have to say, okay, for majority of people or what have you, a majority of my clients, when I've asked them about this, after they turned, they blushed and got a little shy. And those that were open were very open about the fact that they really enjoyed this piercing. However, like any sexual piercing or any piercing that's related to sex, a lot of it may have to do with your mind. And as that newness wears off, that may change. And I'll go into that a little bit later. It may, getting this piercing may change how it feels. It may be better. It's probably not going to be worse, but it's definitely going to be different. But this one is known to do that. I know a lot of people claim that they walk down the street and have fireworks immediately or had it during the piercing or what have you. Everybody's wired a little different, and the chances are is that if you do not have that kind of a life, you probably aren't going to have it immediately after getting this piercing done. Number two, this has a long history of healing without issues, very easy heal, and it's going to heal pretty quickly. Usually around 6 to 8 weeks. I suggest treating like a healing piercing for about 3 months. Number three, often this piercing will stay open long after the jewelry has been removed. I don't know how many times I've had a client come in and go, I miss it. I want to get it redone. And I went, before we get into piercing it, let me just get out a taper pen and we'll try putting that through it. And lo and behold, I'd say about 1 in 5, it's still open, even though there hasn't been any jewelry in it for years. So this piercing stays open for a longer period of time than other piercings. Now, that doesn't mean that it won't close if you leave the jewelry out. If you like the piercing, you should always leave something in it. It's just a safeguard against it closing. Number four, this is not going to affect lifestyle as much as other piercings. So you're not going to affect sleeping. It's not going to affect eating. And it's not going to affect your social standing, which is part of what the next one is. Number five, it's easy to conceal. It's easy to hide. This is a piercing that, unless you go around telling everybody or showing everybody, nobody other than those that you're intimate with needs to know you have it. So it's if you live in a conservative part of the world or run in kind of conservative social circles or have a job that's not going to allow you to have anything that's visible as far as piercings, it's a good option because nobody needs to know you have it. Number six, the bonus one. This is not going to have that throbbing and aching immediately after the piercing is done. Unlike, let's say, even an ear piercing, we have that kind of throbbing, aching, etc. With genital piercings, yes, it might be intense initially, but once it's done, that throbbing kind of just ends. It's like, oh, God, that hurts, and then over. So, of course, it's going to be tender to the touch if you bump it, you're going to know it. But for the most part, it's really short-term discomfort. Before I move on to the cons, if you like this video, find it informative, found it edifying, please do one of this. Give me a thumbs up. Let me know that you liked it, because we like it when you like it. If you haven't subscribed, why the hell not? Hit that subscription and then tap on that notification bell so that you're notified every single time we post something. Now it's on to the cons, the disadvantages, the things that we don't like, the things that make us go, yeah, maybe not. Not this one. Number 1, anatomy. This piercing is anatomy dependent. If your clitoral hood is not, or that tissue is not pronounced enough, you can't really get this piercing done safely. Also, it has to be large enough that a needle receiving tube can be put underneath it to safely guard against hitting the clitoris itself. This is why we generally do what's called the Q-tip test. And I will get into that a little bit later when we get into the piercing procedure and etc. Number 2, can't have unprotected sex for a minimum of 6 months, regardless of how long you've been with that particular partner. Remember, we're not worried about the usual things when it comes to safe sex, which is STDs. What we're worried about is an exchange of bacteria in an open wound and causing an infection. I generally suggest using some type of latex barrier for a minimum of 6 months after getting a vertical clitoral hood piercing. And on the same subject, you are more prone to STDs even after the piercing heals. You have a hard piece of metal through soft tissue. There's always a possibility during the enjoyment of sexual activities that you will cause a tear, even minor, in that piercing, and then you have an exchange of bacteria, including STD-style viruses, and you leave there with something you didn't come in with. So, it's why you should always practice safe sex the way you're supposed to, which means latex barriers until you've both been tested and 6 months have passed. Twice. Once, then 6 months later. Number 4, this is a controversial one. May lose sensitivity. Now, this is a part of the body that doesn't have continuous and ongoing contact. We are suddenly putting a ring against it, or a piece of jewelry, I should say, a curved barbell against it that's going to have constant contact with it. Over time, this can cause it to maybe lose a little bit of sensitivity that it had before. Also, the newness of the piercing and the sensation fades. It becomes common. Just like with new love, everything's really exciting, and then about 6 months into 18 months, it kind of dulls, and yes, it's still enjoyable, but it's not what it once was. Same thing comes to piercings like this. Over time, you kind of compensate and get used to it. It's not a new sensation. It's just the normal thing, and you get kind of bored with it, so to speak. Remember, your biggest sexual muscle is always your brain. The more excited you are about new things or piercings, etc., the more exciting that activity is going to be. So they can, to a degree, lose sensation. Now, whether or not that's a physical thing that happens or if it's just, it's normal now, who knows? Number 5, some women have found this piercing way too much for them to handle. It's too much sensation. I've had clients that had it for 3-4 days and just basically did not like the way that it felt and asked me to remove it, sometimes even longer. The thing about these piercings is, like I said, it's a constant contact with a very sensitive part of the body that normally doesn't have a lot of contact because it's usually covered by the thing we pierce through, the hood or the top of the labia minora. So some women find it a little too much. Just like we're all wired differently, so it's one of those possibilities. And the last one, number 6, the bleeding. These can bleed anywhere from 1 to 5 days, varies from person to person, and it's generally why we suggest wearing a sanitary napkin or pad, not only to add, cut down the bleeding, staining clothing, but also to add a little bit of cushioning and reduce the amount of moisture in the area. Now, with the cons out of the way before we move on to things you should know, let's talk a little bit about our merch store. We have plenty of designs, various different colors, all kinds of different products. It helps to support the channel, and you look cool at the same time. Check it out. Links in the description. There's also one of those merch bars down below. Now let's move on to things you should look for, things you should consider before getting this piercing done or talk about. The first one being is that your piercer should be experienced. especially with this particular piercing. They should have a lot under their belt, or if they're training, there should be somebody there to guide them through it and supervise. They should be professional, especially professional. They should be informative, and they should make you feel comfortable. In other words, you are probably going to show a part of your anatomy you normally don't show to everyone. So it's important that you have a piercer that you feel comfortable with that and knows how to make you feel comfortable with that. So keep that in mind. The piercer should also give you a consultation that involves things like what it's going to take to heal it, what the experience may be like, ask questions about mental allergies or any other things that you may have that may either impede you from getting the piercing or may cause issues. Lastly, the piercer should do an anatomy check before they agree to do the piercing. This involves usually taking a Q-tip, pulling off as much of that excess or cotton tip applicator, lubing it up with a little bit of water-based lubricant, and then gently sliding it underneath the hood and pulling it down. Generally, if there's enough there and it's loose enough, usually it will cover up almost the entire cotton part, or it will, do a majority of it. This will also tell them where it's going to be positioned and how it's going to look. Don't get pierced by anybody that doesn't do that, because they're just trying to rush you through as quickly as possible. It's very important that you have the correct anatomy for this piercing to reduce problems or possibly do something harmful. They should have the correct jewelry in stock, 14 gauge or thicker, and it should be a curved barbell. No straight barbells. I don't understand why people do this. There's also, you can do them with rings, but they can be a lot more difficult to heal, and the sensation is a lot different than it is with the curved barbells from what I've been told. The other option would be they're kind of L-shaped or J-shaped bars. Some people find those very comfortable. They have various different names they go by. They can be a little tricky to insert, but yeah, they kind of sit a little bit different inside there too. But those are fine too. Just no straight barbells. No reason to do that. You should understand that this piercing is going to bleed anywhere from 1 to 5 days, sometimes up to a week. You are probably going to need a sanitary napkin or pad. It's a good idea to buy those in advance and have them with you when you go in to get the piercing done. Next up, it's not going to feel comfortable or is really advised to have sex for the first roughly 5 to 6 days. It varies from person to person. Some people, it's a couple weeks. Sex is going to be something that you probably want to kind of stay away from for a little while. So if you're with somebody, you need to discuss that with them, your partner, and you might want to have some fun time before you go in just to kind of get it out of your system for a little while. Because one thing you're going to learn once you get your piercing done is it constantly reminds you that you have genitals, which will generally raise your libido a little bit. So try to get that itch scratch, so to speak, as much as possible before getting the piercing. Lastly, does your piercer supply aftercare products, instructions, all that fun stuff? The instructions should be written. You should have some form of verbal instruction, either a basic rundown of what to do. I generally will go through the basics, and then I will say, there's a 19-minute video on the front page of my website. Watch it. If something doesn't make sense to you, get a hold of me. Also, I'm going to give you written instructions that are going to include the size of the jewelry, the type of jewelry, what it's made out of, when it was done, and what the average healing time is, and all of my contact information. Now, with that out of the way, let's talk about the piercing experience itself. Of course, you're going to initially have the consultation that's going to cover some of the things we already talked about, like healing and risks that are involved, etc. Also, they're going to have you fill out a waiver that's going to cover a few additional things that you need to think about, and that would be any health issues you may have, any allergic reactions you may have to the materials they're using, and that will be listed there on the waiver. Additionally, any metal allergies. Also, if you're on any medication, controlled or controlled substance that may impair blood clotting or cause unusual complications. On the subject of pre-existing medical conditions, etc., they're going to ask you if you're pregnant. And you should never get pierced when you're pregnant. Never. It's too much of a risk. It may cause issues. If you get an infection, you may not be able to take medication to do that because it might harm the child. So never do that. The worst case scenario is you the trauma of the piercing and the anxiety that's usually involved with it can cause a miscarriage. And I know no one on this planet that would willingly get into that possible risk and put somebody through it. Additionally, things like diabetes, hemophilia, blood clotting problems, anemia, you need to speak to your doctor. Don't ask us if it's going to be okay. You really need to talk to your doctor because they're going to know a lot more about your medical condition. And all those things can affect bleeding. They can also affect how quickly you heal. Diabetes, especially if you're type 2 and you're well medicated and it's under control, shouldn't create a lot of problems. But if you're worried or you've had problems healing wounds, talk to your doctor. On blood thinners, heart medication especially, or if you have had are prone to blood clotting or what have you, blood clots. Yet again, you should talk to either your doctor and possibly your pharmacist to ask them if there's a possibility of reducing it or how much bleeding it will probably cause. In other words, we're piercers, not doctors, not medical professionals. We don't know everything. We may act like we do. Some of us may think we do, but it's always best to consult an expert. With the waiver done, we'll set up all the tools that are possibly going to need. With this one, it's going to be, of course, a piercing needle, a needle receiving tube, which is going to be a hollow tube that's often mistaken for the needle. People look over and they see this fairly wide, long thing, and they go, in this tubular shape, and they go, is that the needle? No, that's the needle receiving tube. Also, of course, gauze, disinfectant, everything else we possibly need, marker, etc. Once that's all set up, we'll disinfect the area with some type of surgical scrub. Generally with this, I do that with the person reclined. Here's the thing on clothing, just kind of a refresher. Do wear underwear. And the reason being is that the pad after the fact. The next thing is, it's not a bad idea to wear something you can just lift up or move to the side. Don't wear something that's like a onesie that you're going to have to be completely naked. Probably your piercer's not going to have any issues with this, but you may. The other thing is how much privacy that particular piercer has. Me, I have a separate room. When I didn't have a separate room, we had blinds to make sure that no one could see what was going on. Do take that into account when you're choosing your piercing studio and piercer. Ask them about privacy. Now, when you're wearing clothing, skirts are great, dresses are great. Pants are fine, but you're going to probably have to remove them. So do keep that in mind, how comfortable you are and what have you. So once it's disinfected, we'll do that Q-tip thing again to kind of pull that tissue away, mark it, and then I'll usually remove the Q-tip and mark it again just to make sure that that placement is deep enough, but it's also going to look centered. Once the marking is done, you're in a reclined position. We take the needle receiving tube and insert it underneath the hood, inject the needle in and through, and then pull the and then take usually the barbell has a guide pin on it that's threaded on there. Put that in the needle to push the needle out and the jewelry in. Take that threading off, put the ball on, and you're done. Pretty quick piercing once we get going. Like I said, with the experience, most people experience initial like, oh God, that hurts, and then it's over. Literally within 5 seconds after the piercing is done, you don't feel anything pain-wise. Now, if you bump it, you're gonna know it. There might be a little bit of slight bleeding right off the bat. Usually we'll try to stop any bleeding that's occurring at that time, have you take a quick look and go, yay! And then we will, if you didn't bring a pad, I'll usually give you a couple of pieces of gauze that are soaked with some saline solution to kind of keep it from staining clothing. And then we'll go through aftercare and all that fun stuff. The piercing is definitely going to be sensitive to touch, so it's not a bad idea to have a day where you just kind of hang out and don't have to worry about it. Now, everybody's worried about walking. Walking usually doesn't cause a problem with this particular piercing because if you think about where your legs go back and forth and where this piercing is located at, they're pretty far away from each other and shouldn't affect it at all. With the piercing experience out of the way, let's move on to healing. Average healing time, like I said earlier, is roughly 8 to 12 weeks. I do suggest always treating this like a healing piercing for 3 months, especially if you're active sexually. Clean twice daily with a sterile saline solution. I like Nelmed's piercing aftercare. The mist style is easiest to use. If it's not the mist style, you may have to do compresses. You need to practice cross-contamination prevention. And that's fun stuff your mom should have taught you. Wash your hands before you handle it. No oral contact or exchange of bodily fluids on, near, or around the piercing for a minimum of 6 months. That doesn't mean you can't have sex for 6 months. That just means you need to use some type of latex barrier. Pro hint, dental dams, the one place I always know where you can find them is at Planned Parenthood. Just so you know. No swimming. Do not submerge piercing in bodies of water you cannot control the quality of. Keep pets away. Everybody kind of chuckles at that, but mainly what I'm concerned about is letting them sleep in the bed and you having contact with that bedding once the pet has contaminated it. Yeah, because any other idea on that one's kind of gross. Keep your bedding, clothing, anything that comes in contact with it cleaned on a regular basis. Clothing-wise, I really would suggest loose-fitting pants if you are wearing pants. Skirts are great. The one thing you kind of want to avoid at first, and it's not everybody that has a problem with this, but some females do, is jeans that are tight and have a very thick seam. For some reason, when that rubs against her, it does not feel very good at first. That will fade over time, but give your body a little bit of time to heal that piercing up, and it won't be quite as sensitive. Sex whenever you are comfortable. If it hurts to do something, try doing something else. Like I said, latex barriers. Also, another thing is stay away from anything that has any warming gels. If you use lubricant, warming gels, flavors, spermicide, etc. All those things can lead to issues and definitely will cause some discomfort. So stay away from any of that stuff. And this one comes totally down to body type, but don't sleep directly on the piercing if it has contact with the bedding. It's not going to feel good. Most women, that's not the case, but just so you know, that constant movement when you in agitation you're going to cause while you're sleeping is going to cause problems. First 3 to 5 days, you're going to see redness, discolorization, heat, tenderness to touch, inflammation. Also, of course, the slight bleeding off and on. Jewelry. Leave the jewelry in at all times, only taking it out to replace it, especially the first year or so. As I stated earlier, this piercing has a reputation of staying open long after the jewelry's been removed, but it's always best to keep something in it if you plan on keeping the piercing. If you have medical issues or what have you, I generally suggest if you need a retainer that you use glass retainers. They're not designed for long-term wear, but they will work in the short term and keep the piercing open. You may need to downsize. This varies greatly from person to person. Sometimes experimenting with different jewelry sizes, shapes, etc. can improve the experience or at least make it feel more comfortable. If the barbell is extremely long and seems like it's getting caught on things, definitely downsize as soon as you possibly can. This should be obvious, but just in case it isn't, avoid jewelry that has sharp edges, points, things dangling off of it, or seems extremely heavy. All it's going to do is get caught and snagged on everything it comes in contact with, and it's not going to be fun at all. Best jewelry styles are curved barbells with 2 balls on both ends, just standard stuff. Rings are possible along with circular barbells. The thing about them is the rings are going to have more of a higher profile. They're more likely to get contact and move around a lot more. Some people find them great. Some people don't. You can try it, but I really don't advise it during the healing process. The biggest thing is stay away from straight barbells. Like I mentioned, the J-style bars will work too. Let's talk about living with a piercing. Once this piercing is healed, there's not really much maintenance you need to do. The jewelry should be left in at all times. When switching partners, of course, practice safe sex when you're switching partners, and take care of each other. One last thing is, because I mentioned this on other videos, chastity. This piercing has been used in that direction, or at least people assume it is, with what they call a clitoral shield or a clit shield. Anyway, it puts a lot of pressure on the piercing. Also, there's always questions about what that material is actually made out of and what the effectiveness of it is at all. If anything, it would be a novelty, to say the least. And lastly, what happens if you decide you don't want the thing anymore and you decide to abandon it? If it's during the healing phase, you do need to keep an eye on it, just like you would any other open wound. Make sure that the area is cleaned on a regular basis, or at least kept clean. Keep things away from it, and just practice cross-contamination prevention. Now, if it's healed completely, it may never heal. Just understand that. It's not going to really cause any problems or anything you need to worry about. You may have some sebum that collects in it. What it is kind of waxy oil. Has a very distinct odor to it. Beyond that, it's not anything you really need to worry about. Well, that's all I have to say about vertical clitoral hood piercings today. I hope you enjoyed this and found it edifying. If you have any questions or would like to share your experience with this particular piercing, please leave a comment. Till next time, here's hoping only piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video.